ditches or drainage ditches on the side and those kinds of things. So the pavement was the key on that, and I think that's what Councilmember Fitzgerald is referring to.
So in most of the areas outside of the corporate city limits, most of them were developed prior to this requirement. Areas that have been added onto and totally developed had to fulfill this requirement. So when some of you I've heard communication or had communications with some of you related to, well, our road isn't, are you going to take over our road? Well, if it does not meet city standards, it will be maintained as a private road, and the HOA fees or whatever you guys have agreements amongst yourselves, that would have to stay that way unless you want to bring those roads to meet city standards. And then we would be happy to have them dedicated as city streets, and we'd take care of the maintenance and snow removal and so forth. Is that an additional cost to the homeowners? By all means it is. We understand that.
City Council would have to accept those roads as a body. If that homeowners association wished to do that, they would come before the City Council and ask permission to do that, but yes.
Yeah, I think most folks that are here that live in those rural subdivisions also know that they own to the center of that street. Those are private roads maintained by the association, and so there's not any dedicated public ways within those streets. So the city couldn't go in there and make changes without your permission anyway. I mean, you essentially have control of that. In order for the city to assume the maintenance and control of it, it would take a dedication of that subdivision of those streets to the public for us to be able to do that. I hope y'all understand that.
Mayor, I had a question for you,
Yes.
either Greg or Steve. On fire protection, you mentioned the existing areas within the city that are similar to this situation. Do those have fire mains and hydrants?
Adequate fire protection and hydrants.
Versus a pumper truck?
Yes.
They do? They do have mains and hydrants? So there's that distinction.
MPW would be required to follow city standards within the city limits. A good chunk of those water mains outside of the city limits, is my understanding, do not meet city specs or standards.
They do not.
Okay.
And therefore they do not have fire suppression capabilities.
Adequate pressure, absolutely.
They're designed for residential service and not fire protection, and the equipment we have would cause a number of those mains to collapse. They're not designed to handle that type of equipment. When they were put in, they weren't designed for that purpose, which is a shame, but it is what it is, so just so everybody understands.
Would it be helpful for Andrew to run through a couple of these scenarios, the first 3, 4, whatever council likes, or not? I mean, it's up to you.
I think it would be fine, and Greg, so that you know, I'm still, I want to see where we're going when Andrew is done. But there are a lot of people here, and I'm going to have 1 or 2 of you get up. If you have a question, I'm sure there's a ton of them, and I'll let you ask questions. This is not a debate, and I told you beforehand. This is an informative session. I want you to leave here feeling like you have been informed. So, Andrew, go ahead, and then when we're all done here with council members, I'm going to let somebody out there speak on behalf of the various divisions.
Andrew, why don't you run through A and B just as an example of how to read A and B, if you could.
Well, let's do A. We'll start with A since it's...
So
Let me flip to it here. I can't read it from this far off. I'm sorry. Okay. Obviously, the first thing there is the map, and the area that you're talking about is in gray. That's pretty simple and straightforward. On the left-hand column, you have some basic demographic information about the area, the population, number of households, total number of parcels, acreage, the total 2010 assessed value, and then what the estimated city property tax receipts would be based on the current city tax rate. And so that's what you have in the left-hand column. Then moving over to the chart there, what you have is you have 4 lines, and those represent the combinations of the 2 fire scenarios and the 2 sewer scenarios. So when you look at that, wherever you see an X, that means that that's what that scenario is assuming. So like on that top one, it's assuming that there's no new fire station constructed, current staffing ratio is maintained, and that no sewer is constructed, because that's where the X is. And if you look back over the net annual income after after, operating costs and salaries is a little over $1 million. And then the next column over to the left, it lists what the total capital improvement cost would be. And finally, it calculates the number of years to recover capital costs. Then all the other 30s follow this formula exactly, so.
Andrew, were there any specific combinations that looked particularly favorable versus others?
One way, if, back it up one, sorry, let me back up one slide. If you're looking at, if you go back to the tables
Is that
that
page-
are contained
page 11?
starting on page 8, how they're sorted is by years it would take to recover the capital costs. So the ones at the top of the list would take the shortest amount of time for the city to recover capital costs. I mean, I guess how you rank them depends on what kind of criteria you'd use, but that's what these tables are for, is to allow you to kind of compare across different areas on the same scenario in terms of providing services.
Okay.
And yeah, I think some of them definitely do look better than others, but it all depends on what kind of criteria you're choosing to use.
If you simply look at scenario A, which is the entire area, it's a 2.4 year payback for those basic services. If you start adding the streets and the sewers, that's where the costs come, and that's where, that's what takes it out multiple years, and in some cases, there is no payback. So Area A is the easiest one to look at. It's the entire area, and you can see that it's a 2.4 year payback.
But keep in mind that may not be a payback in 5 years or 10 years, but as soon as the area, if the area is annexed, it's in the city forever.
Absolutely. And
So
those
it's
are-
not, I mean, if you talk about 10 years, okay, but they'll be here for the next 100 plus.
Right.
So-
On the capital cost, it's a 2.4 year
Yeah.
payback on the capital cost. You're absolutely right. Those are ongoing costs to provide garbage, recycling, all city services, other than the two that we've talked about.
Anything else, Phil?
No, thank you, sir.
Tom, did you have anything?
I'm going to just give a couple comments here. First of all, we are about 40 minutes into the meeting here, and I'm as educated on this subject as when the meeting started. With respect to Andrew here, I know you put a lot of work into this here. A few things here, I'm not going to side with the people who are sitting out there or being a member of the city council. So right now, I am not for or against annexation. And the reason is, I'm not well educated on this subject, and the material is provided to us here to make that decision. There is a lot of work to be done here. With respect to Andrew and your study, I disagree with the numbers that you provided for city council here. I don't think they are 100% accurate that's my perspective on it. I think we need to do more diligent on these numbers to get it up to an accurate, because I don't want to be down the road here, the cost going to increase by 20% or 25%. Few questions here that I ask myself here. First of all, is the city have the funds to bond for this project to move forward? That's one. That's for us as city council to ask ourselves. Second, if I'm sitting on the other side of the aisle here and I'm saying, really, what kind of benefit I'm getting out of this? And we mentioned it's, okay, garbage and the sewer, it's not included, but we're going to run that trunk sewer. If I live in Mark Twain Edition, for example, and I'm just saying this for an example, where are you going to put that cap? Is that going to be on 61? Is it going to be on the entrance of Mark Twain Edition? And every single house from there have to provide that connect to that line? Or is it going to be in the middle of the subdivision? How much is going to cost each individual to do that? So there's a lot of questions out there to be answered, and to be honest with you, I'm not for it at this time here, and of course I'm not against it. If we're going to expand our city here, this is great, but the bottom line, I think, to be fair and to be responsible. I think I go back here to about a year ago that we did the same exact thing down at the south end. 30 years later, we found out the job was complete. So is that going to be 3-5 project? Is it 5-year project to present all the services that we're going to give to these people who are going to be annexed? I don't know these answers. So moving forward, I know this is just a preliminary study and presentation, but I'm sitting here just dumbfounded. I mean, what are we getting out of all this? So there's a lot of questions to be answered. So this is just a start for me here, and I'm sure I have more questions and more comments to make down the road. And I've been fielding, like the rest of council probably, 50 emails, 50 phone calls, and I'm giving them answers best to the knowledge that I have and the material that presented to council at that time. So that's where I stand at this time here, and hopefully we can get more educated down the road.
Anyone else, council?
Yeah, I've got a follow-up to that, Mayor. Just as an example to what Osama's talking about, like engineering design costs of the trunks or legal costs associated with that, I'm just asking now, is there any of those costs included in the figures?
In developing the cost for that, I worked with the city engineer, and he sketched out some initial routes that the sewer lines would perhaps run, and he gave his best guess on what that would cost based on the costs that he's establishing for the Clearview Mobile Home project. So those represent the best guess of the city engineer.
Mayor,
Yes.
could I have Steve or Greg respond to Osama's comment about the south end of Muscatine being 30 years and the development board, or that board in Des Moines, what response they would have if 3 years, if we say we're going to do this and we're going to develop this and do these, provide these services in 3 years, what happens if we don't do that?
What's the law?
What's the,
What's the
Law.
law? What
I
happens?
don't know about the south end, you want to take the south end?
Well, obviously, I think the current statutes have that in mind, and I'll just be open about it. I think the days of what people call a land grab are over under Iowa law. The city that chooses to work toward annexation has to provide a plan for how they're going to serve that area. And they have some latitude in how they do that, what they do and don't do. But they have to provide a written narrative that they present to the city development board as a condition of annexation. And I think that has to be reasonable. Now, I can't tell you what that is because we won't know until we get there. We've never been down that road with them. But based on my experience in the past, you have to present a realistic case. If they see holes in it, they're going to call you out on it. And remember that they have a great deal of input and can require additional public hearings at the local level if they don't feel that the information is adequate for their purposes. And these are folks that are used to this kind of development. So they have some experience in it. I don't think you're just going to go in and lay something out lightly. You're going to have to do that through consultation. And I think the city's intent, I'm probably belaboring the issue, I don't mean to do that. But this, just so it's clear to everybody, and it sounds like it's not, and I apologize for that, but there has been council interest in evaluating annexation opportunities. To that end, staff has put together a report that shows some of those options. When you looked at the initial one, and I'm going to jump ahead of Andrew, but I think there were like 40 different scenarios, and if you plugged in all the options that you can think of for that, there were like 2,800 of them. And so those were all put together, and we've backed those out so we can present a more simplified version of how this might work. So council kind of gets a feel, and the residents kind of get a feel for how this might work. While I have the floor, Osama, I'd like to address, if I can, your question with the sewer. Our plan that's before you tonight proposes that sanitary sewer would be extended to the property lines of the private developments. Private development would be responsible for extending sewer within that subdivision and making connections. Again, go back to the comment I made earlier, we don't own anything in that subdivision. We can't take it in there without them dedicating that space anyway. We have no authority to enter into that for that purpose. But we would use the public